Thank you, Anthony. Go to lawandcrime.com to learn about more of the top trending stories of the day. And Norman Williams and I before talked all about that horrible, horrible baby case. And now that mother faces some serious, serious trouble. But luckily, the baby survived. But I want to talk now about the James Colley case. I want to go back to that, the Florida case, the man who was on trial for the murder of his estranged wife and her best friend by going on an absolute shooting rampage. There were two survivors of this, Lamar Dobberly as well as Rachel Hendricks. But I want to talk about Lamar Dobberly because he was the romantic interest of Amanda Colley, really the center point of this shooting. It was believed that he was the focus of the shooting, that he was the intended target. So to help me talk a little bit more about this case, I have a special guest with me again today. I'm very lucky. Criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor LaWanda Hodges is joining me. LaWanda, great to see you.
Great to see you as well. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Now, Rachel Hendricks was a terrific witness for the prosecution. Terrific witness for the prosecution. Do you feel that Lamar Dobberly, and we're going to play his testimony in a little bit, do you think he came off as both sympathetic and effective?
I do, actually. I think that, anyone could sympathize with someone being in the position that he was in. Like, he almost died. He had to escape through the garage, and he would have been a third victim had he not escaped. So I think any jury could sympathize with a person like that.
Well, let's play a little of his testimony, and then we'll talk more about it. Remember, he was the romantic interest of Amanda Colley, and it was believed that he was the intended target of this shooting. It's thank goodness no one else was killed, but let's play some more of his testimony right now. There you go. Lamar Dobberly, he was the romantic interest of Amanda Colley, really the center point of this whole shooting. He survived. He survived. He got out of there. And really, he was the intended target. Let's bring back in LaWanda Hodges. You know, we played Rachel Hendricks. We're playing Lamar Dobberly. How lucky do you think they feel to be alive today?
Tremendously lucky. Like you said, he was the intended victim. He was the love interest, and the marriage. It was an estranged couple. It was obvious that the defendant was there to do damage. The house was ransacked. He was completely belligerent. He wasn't someone who was, I hate to say sane, because I know that then you get into like a legal analysis.
Yeah,
but
you're a lawyer. You got to be careful with that word. You can't just throw that up and down.
That's absolutely right. But he was obviously someone who was incredibly enraged and emotional. And with, Lamar being the lover of the defendant's wife, he was obviously the intended victim. And based on what Lamar just testified to, that he witnessed and the gunshots that he heard, and he clearly could have been the third victim.
How important is it, though, for both the prosecution and the defense to have the face of the affair at the testimony, testifying? So really, the whole thing is that James Colley was enraged that she was having this affair, and now the jury gets to see the guy that she was having this affair with, and apparently had a shirtless photo that was sent to James Colley that set him off. How important is it for both sides and the jury to visualize this, to have that there?
Well, I think for the prosecution it's important because you always want to humanize anybody who's experienced some type of trauma, right? And when you see him testifying, his eyes are really glossy, as if he's about to cry any minute. And I think that it evokes sympathy to the jury because they see who the intended victim was and who actually was the victim of the attempted first-degree murder, right? So it's good for the prosecution in that respect because you're humanizing the victim.
Right.
For the defense, probably not as much for the same reasons, because it's one thing to talk about someone and talk about them having an experience, but when the jury actually gets the opportunity to see them, that doesn't really help the defense. Obviously, you want them there because you can cross-examine them, but in terms of there being some type of animosity towards Lamar as being a lover and might have been...
Sex sells. People are looking at it. They're trying to put this love triangle in, so it's something. LaWanda, stand by. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, there's so much more to talk about here in the James Colley case here on Law and Crime. Stay tuned. That is never an easy line of questioning. Am I right, LaWanda? So I'm here again with LaWanda Hodges. So questioning the lover of Amanda Colley about her relationship that she still had with her husband. Were they having sex or not? Not always a comfortable line of questioning, especially for this witness.
Absolutely. But I think what they're trying to do is, I mean, it was intentional. You wanted it to be very raw and for the jury to get it in its rawness, to see what his his response would be without having been prepped. And I think the defense will like this line of testimony because they're trying to set up the second degree, like that it wasn't by the original defense was that he was involuntarily intoxicated, right? Based on prescription medicine that was given to him from his doctors. However, I think in a very reasonable strategic move, they changed that to be, no, this wasn't first degree, this was second degree, recognizing that, the jury is probably going to find him guilty of something. They're not going to let this man just walk away, right? And so it's almost like a compromise, but to establish the second degree, you have to establish that there was something that made him incredibly emotional. It wasn't like a plan or a premeditated incident. It was something that just kind of completely enraged the defendant, knowing that he is still sexually intimate with his wife or soon-to-be ex-wife, and she also has a lover who she's seeing contemporaneously.
What do you think about the fact that the defense, midway through the case, dropped the involuntary intoxication argument? That this wasn't about prescription medication. In fact, we're not going to argue this for the rest of the case, not even on appeal, if he should be convicted. But if he is convicted, we'll bring it up during the sentencing phase. Now, again, don't reveal to our viewers what happened one way or another because we're keeping it a secret. We'll let the verdict know later. But dropping that defense, why did they do that?
Well, like I just said, I think that, they thought about it and they recognized, like, listen, this case is horrible. It's just so horrific. The defendant is likely going to get convicted for something. Right. And so then you have to kind of make a game day decision. And like literally it was a game day, like middle of trial, kind of like, you know what? I don't think that's a strategy we want to go forth with. We need to kind of split the baby, kind of compromise. Listen, you can find him guilty, but understand this wasn't premeditated, which would be the first degree. And knowing that the first degree would, make him susceptible to the death penalty. But if you change it and say, listen, he's guilty, he can do his time, but understand it wasn't premeditated, which really goes to the state of mind of the defendant. And I think that the buildup is like, listen, he couldn't take this. He was just incredibly emotional.
Right.
You have sex toys in the house. We're still having a sexual relationship. So there's always this hope that we might get back together. But you're kind of just playing with my emotions and you're dangling this lover in my face. You send me a photo with his shirt off. I just couldn't take anymore. And it really establishes this, this intent, the mindset that's needed for the second degree.
Telling you, sex, love, matters of the heart. It's one of the reasons we see so many of these cases, LaWanda. So we're going to play a little bit more of Lamar Dobberly being cross-examined by the defense, and this is their opportunity to grill the man that they're saying they're painting him as the picture for why this whole happened. Let's go. Cross-examining a surviving victim is never easy. Want to bring back in criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor LaWanda Hodges. What's the trick to doing it, to cross-examining a surviving victim? I know every case is different, but what's the trick? Give us an inside a tip.
Well, you want to appear sympathetic. You don't want to treat them like a hostile witness, obviously. So you can't be too aggressive because you got to understand they are, in fact, a victim. And you don't want the jury to be upset with you and how you speak to the witness. So typically, you just you want to stay relatively delicate. You have to ask your questions, but you obviously want to appear somewhat sympathetic to their plight and what they've been through. And I think the defense attorney here actually did a nice job in, how he kind of spoke relatively quiet. And he wasn't, doing the fire range type of cross-examination that you can do where you're just getting a bunch of yeses and nos. He's actually asking some open questions and giving the witness an opportunity to kind of think of his response. So, for instance, when he asked him, "Were you aware that they were having marital relations?" And then Lamar was just like, "I don't think I really understand what you're saying." And then he explained it to him. "Are you aware that they were, basically sexually active?" And he said, "No, I wasn't aware." And then he started kind of just asking him questions gradually about the children, all again, which is very strategic, and to establish that the defendant was very emotional, and just wasn't thinking clearly when he responded the way he responded, because, it's upsetting to know that you have your lover in the house when your children are there. Right? It's upsetting to find sexual toys.
I want to touch upon what you said, children. This case is tragic from a number of different levels, but we can't forget the fact that the defendant and the victim had children together. Will that factor, the fact that he is a father, will that come into play if he's convicted in the death penalty part, when the jury has to determine if they recommend a sentence of death? I'm sure that will be brought up by the defense if that should happen, but does that become a factor in your experience that a jury will have difficulty in sentencing someone to death or recommending that they be sentenced to death because they are a parent?
It's hard to say. Like, sometimes they are very sympathetic and, they want to leave the children with at least one parent. And so they may just sentence like life without parole and not do death penalty. However, sometimes they're like, "Listen, this child or these children no longer have a mom, and you took their mom away from them, and you deserve to pay for that." So it can really kind of go either way. A lot of times the ages of the children play a part. The younger they are, I find the more sympathetic the jurors are, because they want the children to at least be able to perhaps visit their parent, but when they're older, it's not so much a factor. But, it's really hard to say. I think that it does. So I guess safe answer, I think it plays some role, but it depends on how much of a role it plays, depending on the age of the children and really how horrific the crime is.
It's a case-by-case basis, never an easy thing. And you know what's not easy? Also, if you were living in the neighborhood when this shooting took place. And I want to talk about Jennifer Meadows. She was a neighbor minding her own business when the shots fired. Let's play some of her testimony right now. Okay, that was just a neighbor who was minding her business and heard all the gunshots. Pretty incredible to be there and pretty frightening. Imagine living next door to this. Let's bring back in LaWanda Hodges. LaWanda, I want to talk to you about premeditation. So that's a big aspect in this case. State wants to say that he was a cold, bloody murderer, that he deliberated on this, he thought about this, knew what he was doing. The defense is trying to say, well, wait a second, whoa. This was a guy who was living his life, had a pretty good relationship with his wife. I mean, they were still communicating, talking about the children. She didn't seem to be in fear of him. And then he just snapped. Which story makes more sense to you?
I think it's tough, but I would lean towards the second degree.
Okay, why?
And I'll tell you why. Because if it were planned, he would not have left I know he intentionally, I know he was trying to kill Lamar and Hendricks, but if it were planned, you would do it when there's not as many people around to be witnesses and potential survivors. That leans towards the second degree, like it wasn't my intent to do this, but I kind of just got out of control. If I'm looking only at those facts, right? But then when you consider the telephone calls that were made to the family members and, just this fear, this rage in his eyes that his mother described when he heard the conversation over the phone, that goes towards the planned, premeditated, fully intentional first degree. So I think in totality, I can totally understand why a jury might find in one direction.
It splits both ways. You really nailed it right on the head. And we're going to talk more about James Colley's demeanor before the shooting when we come back. That was the best friend of the defendant giving a lot of information to that jury. Let's bring back on LaWanda Hodges. LaWanda, what did you take most from the testimony? Was it the revelation about the sex toys that obviously James Colley wasn't happy about, or was it the fact that he gave kind of a motive for why he killed Lindy Dobbins?
All of that. Obviously, the sex toys, the text messages, all of those established premeditation. He had been thinking about it for a while. He was deciding how he was going to handle it. And then he mentioned the best friend and said that, you know, my wife behaves differently when Lindy's around. And so there goes the premeditation for the motive, I guess, for the best friend. And, you know, I'm sure the prosecutor is going to argue that premeditation can be formed in an instant. Right?
Oh, yeah, and I think they made that very clear through that witness, LaWanda. LaWanda, I know we have to sign you off. Thank you so much. It was great having you. I'm signing off. Rachel Stockman's coming on. We'll be back.